Hey guys, welcome back to the What's Next podcast. Coming to you from Monterey Bay, right at the beach. Beautiful day today, probably the best time of year. I'm so excited to have this. I'm actually really surprised to have this guest with us today, Dr. Carmen Simon, PhD. So glad to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you so much, and welcome everyone.
Yeah. Dr. Simon is a Silicon Valley entrepreneur with a vast knowledge of behavioral psychology, founder of Memzy, helping companies like Google, Microsoft, AT&T, Cisco, Hewlett-Packard, Merrick. These are some of the names that I saw on the computer. It's just amazing. Just goes on. McDonald's, Xerox, ESPN. Wow. You got some big people you're working with, huh?
There are some big names, sometimes some startups too. I believe in those as well.
Sure.
So regardless of who is in business and how large their entity, I work with various people because I'm fascinated by the brain. As a cognitive neuroscientist, I have a healthy addiction to the brain.
Oh, yeah.
Because everybody has one.
Right.
Sometimes we don't see the evidence of it, but
Sure.
it's true. Everyone has a brain, and it's satisfying to understand how the brain works.
I was stumbling across the internet, just kind of goofing around, and came across this really neat article, and it was by the Learning Guild. I'm sure you've seen that.
Sure.
And a few other different internet sites have taken it, so as long as I tell you who it's from, I'm going to read this to you. Carmen Simon is a cognitive neuroscientist, author, and founder of Memzy, a company that uses brain science to help corporations create memorable messages. Her most recent book, Impossible to Ignore, Creating Memorable Content to Influence Decisions, has won the acclaim of Inc.com, Forbes, and Fast Company, and has been selected as one of the top international books on persuasion. Carmen holds doctorates in instructional technology and cognitive psychology. Cognitive psychology, easy for you to say. And she teaches at Stanford University. Wow.
Yes.
Wow. She speaks frequently on using brain science to craft communications that not only is memorable, but also sparks action. That was neat. I'm not that good of a writer, so I had to steal that from them. They covered some very interesting.
Thank you. I think the essence of that for anyone who's watching or listening is that it's important to ponder what people remember after they talk to you. And the reason for that is because memories influence decisions. There is no decision that the brain ever makes or will ever make unless there's memory involved. So as you and I were talking about before the recording in terms of how do we increase the viewership or the audience for this podcast, one of the ways to do that is to create something that stays on people's minds, because if they remember you, they're more likely to act in your favor and come back. So our goal for this session would be to see if we can create some memories in people's minds so that they want to come and listen to you again.
Yes. It's I'm a very shy person. So I have stories that I can tell.
Yeah.
You know, in case I'm in a situation where I have to talk to people and I'm froze up. There's many stories of my life. I can trade and talk, and you use those as a storyteller. I'm actually reading a book right now by David Grohl. It's called The Storyteller. And I read a lot about your storytelling.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about the storytelling is part of the memory.
Storytelling is a good technique to create some memories on other people's minds. And unfortunately, though, not all stories are memorable. Sometimes we associate stories with memories. But a few years back, I did a study where I was asking exactly this question. Do people remember all the stories that we share with them? And the answer is no. However, there are stories that can stay on people's minds. So then the better question is, what must a story have in order to earn a spot in somebody's brain? And there are some segments, and I'm sure you as a storyteller would probably agree. For example, no good story is one that doesn't have some very powerful visuals and a very strong context. Like, for instance, for a while I was hooked on the Golden Girls. Do you guys know the Golden Girls?
Yes.
And especially Sophia. Sure. I think she's one of the most prolific storyteller on the show.
Okay.
And anytime you listen to Sophia, she would start her stories and she would say, picture it, it's 1929, Sicily, and the poor peasant girl is going down the street and she realizes that she doesn't have any pepperoni to feed her family. It goes bizarre after that. But notice how in her story you have some very vivid visuals in the context. Like now we know it's Sicily. It is a person walking down the street. So you can invite other people's brains where you are. And sometimes stories that are not memorable do not do that. What are some other elements that your stories have? Like when you share some of your favorite stories, what else do you put in there?
Well, depending on who I'm talking to, if I'm talking to a diver, I'll talk about when I went diving on different shipwrecks in Lake Superior, or, I try to get, or flying, I'll tell about, a plane ride I had or whatever. And, just something like that. Are there specific things?
Yes, so already you mentioned that it was a specific kind of lake, not just any kind of lake. It was Lake Superior.
Right.
And the mistake that sometimes people make is to say, are you sharing stories or are you sharing facts? Well, facts are part of stories. Like we needed to know which lake it was.
Yeah.
But sometimes if people insist on facts too much, then it's a zoomed in story. It's not a full narrative. Mm-hmm. So to have a full narrative, you have the powerful visuals. So see, you already took us to a spot that we can picture in the context.
Right.
And then action starts to happen across time, like you were diving on those shipwrecks and then perhaps something happened and then something else happened after that. I deal mainly with business brains, and unfortunately in business content, nothing ever happens. It's almost like waiting for Godot. Do you know that story? Or nothing ever happens, like a spoiler alert. And then another component from a memorable story needs to be the affective one. So see, it wasn't just a vessel that you were dealing with, it was a shipwreck. So already that has some emotional dimension to it. It's not just something that's neutral. It's one thing to say symbol, but it's another to say a swastika. You see how that one comes with more emotional backing. And sometimes, especially if you're dealing with business content, that affective component tends to be missing as well. So you can only claim a story if you have the perceptive elements, like I can see it, I'm where you are. I can also picture it cognitively, like it's 1929 or it's Lake Superior, but I can also feel something about it. And the stronger the emotion, the stronger the electrochemical signal in your brain, and therefore the more the likelihood that there is a memory.
That's interesting, because I noticed that. I watched a couple of speeches that you did.
Yes.
And as you would cover a topic, you would pause, and before you said anything else, you would add a little bit to whatever you were talking about, just to kind of put them there.
Yes.
As a storyteller, just kind of a little bit more detail before you moved on. I thought that's a real storyteller.
Ooh, I like what you're referring to, and I think a practical guideline that perhaps our audiences can get from this is that a good story, and therefore a memorable story, has some elaboration. And if you know how to do elaboration well, you can extend the story time, because sometimes you can tell a story for 2 minutes, and sometimes you can have it for 20 minutes, and sometimes 2 hours go by. Some good movies will keep you in there for a while, and in the dark, no less. And one of the ways to do that is to pick a core theme and start adding around it, and you elaborate a little more. Are you familiar with the concept of fractals? Fractals are these patterns that repeat themselves at any level of magnification, like what we have behind us.
Okay.
Would allude to some fractals in the sense that you take this very little tiny element and then you repeat it at a higher scale, and then at a higher scale yet. Imagine when you go to a grocery store and you see a cauliflower. What you would notice is that the baby tiny little cauliflower has the same properties as a bigger one and as a bigger head. Or if you look at a tree, the form of the tree has the same shape as the branch of the tree, and the smaller branch yet, and the smaller branch yet.
Right.
And the reason why it's important to make friends with fractals, so to speak, and to be conscious about what they can give you, is that if you have a core, and then you start elaborating around the same pattern with something larger and something larger and something larger, and then you can zoom in a little bit more. It's just a good story is cauliflower all the way down.
That's neat. I wasn't sure exactly where you were going with that. You lost me for a minute, but you came back around. I got it now. Yeah, that's interesting. Another thing I missed here says you have nine books on Goodread. Translated article. Did you do some translating, or? I
used to. I'm European, so when you're a European and you come from a country whose language is not that widely known, you're forced almost to learn some additional ones.
Right.
So therefore, you become a good translator. I used to work for the UN, and I would advocate for any of our listeners, if they don't speak a foreign language, by the way, to start getting that habit, because through that, you start understanding different cultures, you start understanding different ways of thinking, and it's good to magnify your own personality and thoughts. Especially, I feel like in the age of AI, everybody's talking about artificial intelligence these days. We have to preserve more of our human uniqueness and the ability for language, and starting being playful around it and understanding how other people speak their languages will be an inherently human trait.
Yeah. I've got a lot of questions for you around the neuroscience, for sure. But take me back to Romania. When did you come out of Romania?
I came here in 1995.
95, okay.
And I remember having just 2 bags, and somebody was supposed to wait for me at the airport, and they forgot.
Oh, no.
And
You left there.
so it was at the time that you had to use quarters to make a phone call,
Right,
and the airport was closing at midnight. So the person in charge of the airport gave me this 1 quarter to make my 1 phone call. It felt almost like jail. Like
I was just going to
you
say
have
that.
the 1 phone call to make. But no, that was a good memorable entry point. See, it had a good visual. Things happen
There you
across
go, right.
time, and
I can
a
see
very
you
strong
standing there.
emotional component to it. But no, I've really enjoyed living here. I go back to Romania. I try to go at least once a year, and you develop some humility when you travel back and forth, because there are some things that Romania I wish it had compared to the U.S.
Sure.
But I feel that there are some traditions and some customs and some soulful kind of activities that Romania has that the U.S. doesn't have. That's why I'm advocating for learning languages and traveling and being exposed. Have you traveled anywhere interesting recently?
I'm not much of a traveler. I've been to Hawaii, I've been to Mexico, but
Hey, those are strong cultures.
I don't think there's any state in the union that I haven't been to. Maybe 1 or 2.
Oh, hey, congratulations!
So
That's a big deal.
Sure, right.
Yes,
And,
yes. Which one are your top 3?
I love the east side of Tennessee.
Why is
Just
that?
as it gets up into the Black Hills, or it's just beautiful country.
Really?
It's beautiful. Yeah, the season's not so snowy from where I come from. It's warmer. I love Florida. Some people don't like Florida. It's a little too humid for them.
What did you like in Florida?
Just the humidity, the white sands, the beaches, the shark fishing, and all that good stuff.
Shark fishing. Talk about a good story.
Right, So, yeah, we've done that. Yeah, I went down and lived there for about a year or so. That was a lot of fun. So when I first met you, of course, I am a product of the American public school system. So I said, where is Romania? Does that have to do
east of Tennessee?
Anything to do with Rome? And you gave me a little bit of background on. Tell me again what.
Yeah, so Romania does have everything to do with Rome. We were conquered by them, and as a result, our language is part of the Romance languages. So what a lot of people don't know is because of our proximity to Bulgaria, our proximity to Serbia, our proximity to Hungary, they believe that our language is a little bit more on that type of continuum. But no, because of our Rome descendants, we are very much close to Italian and Spanish and French and Portuguese. There are 5 Romance languages.
I was reading about Transylvania, the Carpathian Mountains, medieval castles and churches.
Yes.
What an amazing place.
If you're in search of a good adventure and you want to get in touch with your Dracula
Are you a vampire?
spirit, I was born on Halloween.
Were you? See, I knew there was something.
There is something, but no, I would advocate for Romania if you are ever in Europe and you're looking for good culture and amazing food and very welcoming people, then that's what you'll find there. And some medieval sites. I know that some people from the States enjoy those types of sites. My town, for instance, was founded in 1416, so to us that's old versus some sites here.
It's amazing.
So there is definitely some history.
Right. We were just sailing to try to find America at that point, I think, 1400s, right? Yeah. We didn't even know it was here.
Yes, and those buildings have great architecture. In fact, I remember a documentary where somebody was showing these buildings at eye level, and they were asking passerbys, where do you think these buildings are from? And they could recognize them. But then when they shot some footage from up above, people didn't know that those buildings were from their own town, simply because hardly ever do we look up to see the fractals, if we're talking about, because fractals can be applicable to architecture as well.
Yeah.
So then another practical thing we can extract from this is, as you explore your own town, you don't even have to go anywhere, just look up.
It's for sure. I am a home builder by trade, so I say if I go into Chicago, I've been into some of the big churches in Chicago, and I spend the whole time staring at the ceiling.
Yes.
To architecture and what they did at that point. I can't even imagine going into something in Romania that's from, medieval times.
Yes.
And to see how they put it together, and actually you can see it on TV, but there's something different about putting your hands on it.
And there's some churches that are about that age, and what's amazing to me is that their color has been preserved.
Really?
Yes, for that long. And if we were to then reflect on something practical we can learn from that is put some quality into the work that you do. I mean, we can all learn from your trade in terms of construction. I'm sure that you can tell the difference between something that is just slapped together versus something where the effort is very obvious.
Yeah.
And yet again, if we link it to this AI and the machine that's starting to take over some tasks, I would advocate for honing in your own skills, because if you outsource too much to the machine, at some point we will lose not only our humanity, but the ability to create quality things.
Yeah. We're turning too much over, in my humble opinion. I look back 100 years and go, he was a...
We have to be careful with that, because obviously the machine could be better in terms of some precision, and it could be better in terms of working longer. The machine doesn't get that back pain or the shoulder pain that you're telling me about.
Right.
But at some point, it's the human spirit that can add the quirkiness to that architecture that we're talking about, and a little flair and a little bricks with soul, so to speak.
Right. I want to be inhuman.
Yes.
Okay, back to the neuro. Oh, I did want to ask you, and I touched on this a little bit before we started taping. Do you help content creators on social media, or do you you're dealing with mostly big companies?
Big companies who still need some help on social media. Social media is just one aspect. What we deal mainly with, and my company got bought by another that's called Corporate Visions. So we help companies create messages in such a way that the brain remembers and then makes a decision. So whether that message is on social media, or whether that message is in a sales presentation or in a video or in a website, the medium is not sometimes as important as the message. And we ask the question, is what you say memorable? And sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is no.
It's not. Right. Yeah, I have a terrible memory. That's a great question. What's the best way to remember things?
Well, you're not alone. I mean, all of us, since we are humans and we haven't merged with robots just yet, we all have fallible memory, so you shouldn't feel bad about that. You're not alone. As long as it's not dysfunctional, which it's not, so you're fine.
Right.
But one way to remember, and there is no secret about this, is repetition is the mother of memory. And one principle we advocate is if you have a message and you want people to remember it, come back to it again and again and again and again and again. And only then maybe people see it for the first time. So then you have to continue repeating the same thing. So that's why one piece of advice for your podcast is, as you develop the theme, and I love your theme, by the way, What's Next? Keep repeating that and come back to it again and again. And by the way, your title is absolutely great from a brain science perspective, because where the brain is concerned, the most important thing is what happens next.
Oh, really?
Yes. Yes.
I knew that. That's why I called it that.
Well, if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, you have to continue anticipating the future. Otherwise, you wouldn't know what to adjust or what to do.
Right.
The only reason why we have a brain, by the way, is so we can move, physically move. And in order to continue moving is you have to anticipate your next move. Where should I go next? So the brain is constantly in the future, is constantly trying to anticipate the next moment.
What's next?
How do we do that? Quite often by remembering the past. So retrospective memory is still important because that's how you can sharpen your predictions. But prospective memory, which is remembering the future and where to go next, that's the most important.
Judging by your past.
Yes.
Remembering to go forward.
Yes.
You know, I saw this interesting, I believe he was maybe a marital counselor, and he was also a minister, and he was talking about the difference between the male brain and the female brain. And he was saying that, you know, a female brain is almost like a ball of wire. Everything is connected to everything. They remember everything. And he was saying, as guys, you want to talk about cars, we go in and we take the box out that says cars, and we open that up and we discuss what's in the box. If you want to talk about something else, we need to put the car box back. It was kind of funny. He was a really hilarious dude to listen to. You know, do you find that? Is there a big difference between the male and the female brain, or don't you?
Those differences are more for comedy reasons that they are stated, not for biological reasons. Biologically, we're not all that. Sure, there are some differences, but not as sharp as comedians portray them to be.
Sure.
You know, there's that statement: women are from Mars and men are from Venus, or the other way around.
Yeah.
It's not that big of a distance. It's more like women are from Iowa and men are from Idaho.
Right.
So there are some minor differences, and what would sharpen those differences would be more experiences and exposure to what life gives you, that you start developing those compartments, because it's possible for some women's brains to develop those same compartments that you're talking about. And it's possible for some creative male artists, for instance, to have that ball of wire that you're mentioning.
Yeah.
And that's just all exposure and repetition, as we're talking about, to something that your brain prefers and you get a lot of rewards out of.
Right. That's interesting. Is there as people age, do you hit them differently that way?
Oh, yes. So age will definitely play a role in what we remember, because up to the age of about 25, give or take a few years, we learn quite differently. After the age of 25, some of those gates start being closed a little bit more. So the effort has to be a little bit more deliberate. So for instance, when you're young and you start being exposed to many experiences, sometimes it takes one time of exposure and you will remember that thing forever. Whereas as adults, you can be exposed to many things many times and nothing really sticks. What does it take, in addition to repetition, by the way, for something to start sticking? Being deliberate about the fact that something needs to change. So attention is definitely mandatory in the process of learning. Sometimes as adults, we start not being attentive to what's going on.
Yeah.
But deliberate attention and the statement, I want for this to change and I want for this to be remembered, is where the process starts.
Oh, yeah. Right. Well, 100 years ago, we didn't have a whole lot of stuff to remember.
Yes.
There was only so many things that went by us, Now I look at the computer, I have to forget everything that I see. Otherwise, I wouldn't have any room for anything else. You have to exercise that muscle to forget.
Yes.
Am I right?
You're definitely right. We are overwhelmed by a lot of stimulation, and the brain hasn't changed much in the past 30,000 years.
Right.
What has changed, however, is our threshold for stimulation, because on one hand, we complain that, oh, this is overwhelming, I have all this stimulation coming at me. But on the other hand, we start craving it. And notice next time that you're sitting next to somebody, how long before they grab their phone and they start scrolling through things and they keep staying there and the stimulation goes by. Think about how many contexts you're exposed in modern times versus 100 years ago. Many years ago, you would have been exposed maybe to somebody's house, to a field, to a mountain, and those were the contexts that you saw. Right now, you scroll through Instagram, for instance, and within minutes, you'll have been exposed to 100 contexts.
Right.
So now your brain is on overstimulation, but we start getting used to that, and then we start craving it. So the ability to sit alone in a room and not look for stimulation is starting to become now a skill. Like you have to go to training for that to develop some Zen-like capabilities.
It's tough.
Takes
just a
discipline.
waterfall hitting you in the brain.
Yes,
it's
takes
just
discipline.
too much.
And so then you were talking about your social media and how do you get more audiences for this podcast, or anyone who's listening who is in need for their own audiences. And the question is, how do you penetrate through the noise? And these days it takes extra effort, because when people are bombarded with all this stimulation, one segment, by the way, that helps is distinctiveness. So if you start observing for patterns, at some point, if you deviate from that pattern, then that's what gets the brain's attention.
Okay.
And why does distinctiveness, by the way, help is because as the brain tries to anticipate the future, tries to anticipate what's next, any kind of deviation or an element of surprise is an error in prediction. It's like, oh,
And it'll
I
stand
didn't.
out.
Yes, I didn't see this coming. So surprise is different from novelty because novelty is something that you haven't seen or experienced before. Surprise is something that you have seen or experienced before but did not expect.
Right.
You see, so as you go and you zig and you zig and you zig, and suddenly something zags, it's like, oh, wait a second, I better pay attention here because
Right.
that was an error in my prediction, and that cannot happen the next time. So for your podcast, wonder what kind of elements of surprise can you offer next, given some sameness, some patterns that are the same.
That's kind of the idea of advertisement. Is to
Quite often.
get something out there. And as we go through the years, more and out this is outside of the box and pushing it. Pretty soon, it's just craziness. You know.
Well, so see, there is a distinction between being provocative and being surprising the right way.
Yeah.
Because, provocative could involve an element of surprise. Like I'm sure you can think of some campaigns that may have shown some nudes, for instance, when you didn't expect that. You expected people to be fully clothed, and that would have taken you by surprise.
Right.
As long as it's not used gratuitously, then you can get away with it because the brain can detect plastic very easily.
Yeah.
So we'll know when we are being taken advantage of.
Sure. Yeah, my kids are in their 30s now. So, but I look back at, when they were young and watching, I don't know, say Rent and Stimpy or something with just the grossest things. It was like, I can't believe they're pushing the envelope so far.
Yeah.
But it just kept getting worse and worse and worse because of what you're saying. We have to get something that's really going to jump out at them that's different than the grossness we just threw at them last week. You have to keep compounding it, too.
Yeah, and the skill is
understand what I'm
to
saying?
is to start observing for patterns first of all, because you can't create distinctiveness unless something is the same first. So, for example, I remember this movie creator, this producer in Norway, who was looking for patterns in television. And these days in television, things are starting to get faster. There's more stimulation. Not only is there more stimulation, but the shots are getting shorter. So watch the next movie and you will see how long a scene lasts and how much movement there is in that scene. Like if you've seen The Bourne Supremacy, for instance, the average shot length in that movie is about 2.4 seconds. And there's so much movement in some of those scenes that at some point you have no idea what in the world just took place.
It's true.
So he was observing for these patterns, and suddenly he thought, wait a second, what would be the opposite of that? So the opposite of fast TV would be slow TV.
Sure.
So he did an experiment. He wanted to see what would happen to his audience if all he did was to film a train ride from Oslo to another Norwegian city that would have taken 7 hours in the train, and just simply show what a passenger in that train would just see outside for 7 hours.
Really?
And people actually tuned in to watch this. In fact, I remember somebody had a testimonial. He said, at the end of the 7 hours, I was watching it from my living room. I felt like getting out from my chair and taking my bag from the overhead compartment because he felt like he was on that train.
Really?
So then he said, wait a second, if I got away with 7 hours on the train, because that would have been considered boring, what else can I do? So then he said, how about watching fire burning for like 12 hours? Would people tune in to watch that? And sure enough, they tuned in to watch that. Then he thought, what else could I do that's even more boring than that? How about women knitting for 13 hours? Would people tune in to watch that? And they tuned in to watch that. But see, he could only get away with those because of the other trends that are advocating for fast and fast and fast and more movement, more action. And then you go the other way, you're zagging toward the slow TV. So now, of course, we're curious to see that.
That's crazy. I saw one where there was an Asian lady just sitting there eating noodles.
Yes, I'm not
For
surprised.
hours, and people will watch this lady just slurping up her noodles. It's like, are we trying to get back to a simplistic?
You can
Are we
only
making full circle to we
you
need
can
to, we're
only
just too
appreciate
much?
that because of the Jason Bourne. So you can't appreciate one unless you have the opposite. So
Yeah.
the brain needs the opposite state in order to appreciate it. by the way, we're talking about Romania. Watch a Romanian movie, which would be similar to that. So if you're watching Jason Bourne on this one spectrum, go to the opposite, and you would see, like this movie, for instance, it's called Police Adjective, if you're into independent kind of awkward movies. And you'll see exactly that. The guy who's eating soup, in the real time that would take you to eat soup. But the director was after those effects, because this is Romania,
Right.
this is gray, this is dingy, things are not progressing. So, of course, you're making a point.
Right.
But you can only appreciate one point if you know it's opposite.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the old comedian Jerry Lewis?
Yes.
I loved Jerry Lewis as a child. And there was something about his movies. He would just stop and he would, I don't know, say walk across a room that was the size of a football field. And they would show him walking the
Just
whole
walking.
way,
Yes.
stop, rest, lean against the wall, start walking again. And it was just part of the comedic.
Yes.
But it was so long, it was almost, does it belong there? But it was great. It's almost it was part of the comedic, slang or whatever. But
I can picture that and imagine how much he would have had to work to earn those moments, because you and I walking on that field and doing the exact same thing, if we had learned the exact same moves that he did and we stop and we just huff and puff and then keep walking, nobody would laugh, because we
Right.
don't have the history
Right.
and the memories that he would have put in people's brains prior to that moment. So I guess another practical guideline for anybody listening and for you for the podcast is that keep at it and grind it and earn those memories, because at some point then you're also earning the right to deviate from a pattern that you have created as well.
oh, neat, yeah, interesting, right. So where did you go to school? Where did you get?
I
How
went
old
to-
were you when you got to America? Did
I
you go
went
to
to-
school here? I'm sorry.
Yes. I went to a few schools. So first I started in Romania. I
Okay.
went to college. And then I had this aspiration of coming here to the U.S. to become the next Barbara Walters. That was
Right
going
on.
to be me. So I enrolled in the journalism program, and then suddenly I discovered that I have an accent. Of course, Barbara Walters had some sort of a touch of an accent.
Didn't she?
She had her own
Yeah,
quirky
yeah.
little thing. But I felt like she was more distinguished, and I could have never achieved that status. So I very quickly changed my profile to technology. That's
Okay.
why one of my degrees is in instructional technology. So
see.
I look to see how it is that we can use technology to learn. And then in that process, I got acquainted with the intricacies of the brain. So I thought, ooh, technology plus the brain, that's a good combination. So I started pursuing that a little bit more. So I went to school here in California. I went to school in Florida, one of your favorite
did you? Yeah.
places. Yes, I enjoyed it there very much as well. And then came back and started applying all the academic things to business.
To put it all together.
I sold my soul to corporations.
Well, you started a little company and then you sold it. Is that what happened?
I did.
So Memsy,
yes.
is that the company that you created, and then the other?
Yeah, sold it to Corporate Visions.
Corporate Visions
Yes,
bought it from you.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And through Memsy, the company that I created, I started studying the brain, especially the business brain. And I wanted to see what it could teach me in terms of practical guidelines that then we can apply to communication, very much like to your podcast. So if anyone listening is looking for more audiences, what are some things that we're discovering? We mentioned repetition. We mentioned distinctiveness in order to earn memories. We should also mention making a message rewarding, because the brain does take bribes. We are going to move in your favor if you give us something in return, because that movement will take a lot of energy.
I see. Okay.
So we're looking for something back.
Right,
so
right.
as you think about your podcast, or as listeners are listening and thinking for their own audiences, also wonder, what reward am I giving to
Right.
the audiences if they're giving me attention? Because attention quite often is effortful.
Sure.
So you have to give something back. I was reading this book. Have you heard of Michael Pollan? He teaches
Yes.
at UC Berkeley.
Sure.
There's a book that you may have even
How to
read
Change Your Mind?
in Defense of Food.
Oh, okay.
He enjoys talking about how to keep your body and your brain healthy.
Oh, okay.
So the title of one of his many books is
Yeah.
In Defense of Food, and I love that title because it already has a reward embedded in it. So we all love eating. So if we're defending food, already it's something that I'm curious about.
Right.
When you're saying what's next for your podcast, it's already rewarding because the brain wants to know what happens next. So great job picking that. But yes, a good solid question to ask is, what rewards am I giving to somebody else's brain in order to get something in return?
That's interesting. You hear a lot of the podcasters or maybe content creators, and they'll say, "Well, stay to the end, and you'll get this." Or,
Yes.
We'll tell you how, because they want you to stay to the end.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they're offering that reward, almost the carrot, right?
Yes, and that's a delayed reward. So
I
that's
see.
another technique you're implying very
Okay.
wisely, by the way, which is anticipation.
Ah.
So the moment that you make the reward clear, then already you have some effort from the brain because some dopamine is released. I'm sure that every single listener or viewer for this would have heard about dopamine.
Sure.
It's one of the most popular neurotransmitters. In fact, so popular we call it the Kim Kardashian of neurotransmitters, which I don't think is fair to dopamine. But the reward is clear. I will stay with you. I will stay with you. If you build anticipation, dopamine increases even more because now the brain has to stay and get the reward. It hasn't gotten the reward just yet, but there's the promise. So what we're noticing from neuroscience studies is that dopamine quite often is more so about the anticipation of pleasure rather than the pleasure itself.
I was reading something interesting about dopamine the other day. I was reading about the cold plunges.
Yes.
And they were saying,
good job.
they were saying something about in comparison to like a line of cocaine.
Yes.
Where cocaine lasts maybe for a half an hour. A cold plunge, as far as your dopamine system will, enhances it for 6 hours, I think they were saying, in compared to a pharmaceutical drug. And I thought that was really interesting. Just by something that you can physically do, just jump in the cold water.
Yes,
it
and
just fires the whole brain up.
It's a technique that is being recommended more and more, the cold water exposure. And you're absolutely right. Once you expose your body, now for a prolonged amount of time, so I don't know how you and I would, have you ever tried it? Because even a cold shower, if you try it, you could probably do it for 30 seconds, a minute, maybe 2 minutes for the really stoic. The studies that you're alluding to, those people sat in iced water for a lot longer than that. But still, the advantage of doing that versus getting a hit of some other substances is that the dopamine will increase and it will stay there elevated for a lot longer. But the even bigger advantage of that is not so much in how long it stays, but what happens when it drops. Because you see with some other unhealthy substances, when it drops, it doesn't just drop, it drops below baseline. All of us have a baseline for our dopamine. And of course, there are some things that you can do to take it above, like for instance, a bite of chocolate. Do you like chocolate?
Love it.
So that's 1.5 times above baseline. You can do, yes, you can do sex, you can do nicotine.
Right.
2.5 times above baseline. You can do amphetamines 10 times above baseline.
Sure.
But what happens with those is that you'll stay there for a bit, and if you keep indulging those pleasures, the moment that the dopamine drops, it starts dropping below the baseline. So
Really?
see, in time, that baseline starts changing. That's why people with addictions get in trouble, because they'll have to inject not just to get a buzz, just to get to the new baseline, and then you get something on top of that to now get the buzz, and that's when the overdosing happens, and that's when you have some negative consequences.
Do they just keep hitting lower below the level,
Yes,
and lower and
yes,
lower? And you got to take
exactly,
more
yes,
to get them up.
exactly.
So you're just bringing them back to baseline. And,
Yes. So you don't want to start messing with those healthy levels of baseline in your own system. That's why the cold water exposure is a healthy way of increasing, and when it does drop, it drops to the baseline and not below.
Very interesting. So a cold plunge, what else would do that to you? A cold plunge? When I first moved, of course I came from Michigan, so I'm no stranger to cold. But when I moved here, I thought, I want to start doing this cold plunge, and maybe 2 or 3 times a week I'll run down and I'll just jump in the ocean before I get ready for work. It's cold.
Yes.
It's maybe not as cold as
Yes.
some ice plunges, but I started doing that, and it does. It wakes you up, right?
Oh, yes.
Right?
You'll feel it right away. And if you don't have the stamina for that, what else will get you there is, I was reading about this study, and I think you would enjoy it, and our listeners or viewers would too. These neuroscientists in Switzerland were starting to activate some parts of the brain, usually here in the prefrontal cortex, that are responsible for emotion regulation. And they were noticing that when they were doing that, people were starting to become brutally honest. So then they wondered, could you do it the other way around? The moment that you start with some brutal honesty, now some things here in the emotional regulation parts of the brain will start to be activated. And also that comes with some dopamine release as well. So wonder if when you start your day, if you're not into the cold water exposure, perhaps you're into some exercises that put you in a discomfortable position. Perhaps you're doing something that's a bit more intense. And if none of those work, then some radical honesty with what happens, which could be sometimes painful, is a healthy way of handling it. Because you see, anytime you deal with pleasure, immediately you're also dealing with pain. Pain and pleasure are part of the same coin, are activated in the same way when it comes to this dopamine system.
Interesting.
Yes.
So, like what you were saying, it just, maybe I'm wrong, just the thought of chocolate ice cream almost strikes dopamine. I don't even have to have it yet. It's like, oh, I'm going to go get it. Woo, I'm happy.
That's anticipation at its
Right,
best.
right.
So if you start anticipating it, then yes, already you're starting to feel something. Sometimes
Sure.
it happens before a trip. Like, do you ever plan for a trip and you start packing? You haven't gone on the trip yet, but that part is almost more exciting than
Right.
the trip itself. That's anticipation at its best. And the way that Vegas gets people to keep pressing the levers
Sure.
is because, in addition to anticipation, what happens to the reward? Every so often they give it to you, but every so often they don't.
It's like those rat experiments.
So yes,
Truly.
exactly. So the moment that you have this intermittent schedules for releasing the rewards,
Sure.
then you have even more consistent behavior, because now we don't know if the reward is just about to come, or maybe this time there's a longer interval before the reward is being received.
Right.
So as a practical guideline for your podcast, by the way, or for anyone listening in need of audiences,
Sure.
wonder, when we were talking about rewards earlier, can I distribute those at intermittent periods
Sure.
to the point where the brain cannot predict them? So sometimes perhaps this podcast is an hour and with some unusual guest, and sometimes perhaps it's only 10 minutes with somebody who is a bit more familiar, and sometimes you're silent and you say nothing at all. So the more you vary these unpredictable rewards, the more the brain will stay with you, because they don't know what will happen next.
What's going to happen next?
Yes,
That's
yes,
great.
Yes.
Wow. Boy, that is interesting. We've covered so much stuff that is so far above my head.
No, I think you're understanding
It's
this
amazing.
well, and the biggest compliment is if you start applying it. So the next time, do we have a benchmark? Do we know your audience now? So then when we meet, however many months from now, then I'll ask you, how did these guidelines play out?
Right. So it sounds like you're going to be on the podcast again. Great.
Oh yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Next time, just for 10 minutes, just so we're not predictable.
Just to throw them all off. Well, I know you've got, what did you say, 5 or 6 more recordings you've got to do today in different places. So we're gonna let you go here. We're getting close to where I know you have to be to makeup.
Yes. There are some plans,
Coming
but
up real quick.
I'm hoping that our audience found this useful. And just as a takeaway message, just know that if you are memorable, you will live longer.
Right? Great way to end it. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for inviting
All
me.
right. Bye.